What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another subscriber Q&A video. And as always, if I didn't answer your question, just know that it's not because I didn't like your question, it's because I'm trying to limit how long these videos are. So be sure to add another question in the comments below for this video so we can keep the gravy train rolling. Let's go ahead and dig right in. First off, we got David Steffens. Another great video, John. My question, tri-logo carded figures seem to be rising quickly in popularity and value. Is this due to the fact that they're Return of the Jedi card backs with normally a clear bubble, or some other reason? Keep up the good work. Thank you, David, for the question. That's a good question. And in general, tri-logos, if you go back and look at like the Blacked Out Ewoks on YouTube, he collected a lot of these tri-logos when they were very inexpensive. Nobody wanted them. In the 1990s, they could be found for, 25 bucks, I don't know, 30 bucks. And, everything was kind of cheap back then, admittedly, but tri-logos in general were very, very cheap. And I think now collectors are starting to realize that tri-logos, not only because of the clear blister that you mentioned, a lot of the US cards do fade and turn yellow over time just because of the type of chemicals that were used in those blisters. So that is a problem. And for picky collectors, they don't want to deal with those. So I think that's part of it. And I do think that the other part of it is that those blisters are very fragile. And so when you find a really nice, clean, near mint example for the tri-logo Palatoy card backs, those can command big money because there's such a limited population of them. It all comes back down to supply and demand to a certain extent. And we'll talk more about supply and demand a little bit later on with some of the comic book questions later. But so I think that's part of it. If you look at the population report for a lot of these tri-logos, there's a lot fewer of them that were produced for the European market versus the US market. And a lot of those tri-logos too also got dumped on the US market. It was towards the end of Kenner / Palatoy's heyday. So a lot of the overstock that were not sold in Europe were shipped over here to the US, and you'll see a lot of them with KB toy stickers for $1. And, they were consequently, a lot of them were beat up. They were really beat up. So to find really clean examples, it's very tough. There's also a lot of miscards for the tri-logos because the Palatoy factory was kind of shutting down. So they just slapped figures with mismatched accessories, with mismatched card backs. So all of that stuff can play into it. And, if you look at like the number of tri-logos that are near mint, for example, for a certain character, they can be very, very expensive relative to the Kenner US card back counterparts. So like IG-88, the Death Star droid, Princess Leia, a lot of those were just not produced in large numbers. Luke Farm Boys, Luke Bespin, so they can command $2,000 in really high grade. So I think that's part of it, but all of those factors can weigh on it. But, they're foreign card backs. They have multi-language card backs, and a lot of that is appealing to collectors now because I think that foreign card backs in general, whether they're Harberts or Takaras, a lot of those have really commanded big dollars on the secondary market now as collectors fill out their collection. Next, I wanted to mention the winner of the giveaway from the last subscriber Q&A video. As you guys remember, I had a giveaway going for VC212, the ARC Trooper. This is the Tartakovsky Walmart exclusive, and Chris Caldwell was the winner. Congratulations, Chris, on winning. Please send me an email with your mailing address to actionfiguregrader@gmail.com, and I will get this out. This will come in a case shell, courtesy of Tom Hogan. As always, be sure to check out the video description for Tom's contact information if you're looking to buy any sliding acrylic cases or these really nifty clamshells. They do really great job of protecting your figures. So congratulations to Chris. And Chris's question, he said, what are making these newer comics so valuable? I have so many of the canon Star Wars comics. I think he's talking about Kanan, the Last Padawan, in mint condition that are going for crazy amounts of money. I'm thinking of selling mine at lower rates than eBay's. I'd love to have some of those original Clone Wars TVC figures. And he goes on about how Walmart oftentimes has damaged products. Big surprise there. So, Chris, congratulations again. I'll get this out to you as soon as you send me your shipping address. But to your question about comics, I think a lot of it is driven by Disney Plus. We have a lot of live action content. And as I've talked about in past videos, we used to get a Star Wars movie in theaters every 3 years, at best. And now that we get so much Disney content and so much live action stuff that where they're pulling from these comics, especially some of these modern ones like Kanan the Last Padawan, and they're incorporating a lot of these characters that were in comics or in cartoons like the Star Wars Rebels cartoon into live action. A lot of collectors, they say, wow, I really like Sabine Wren, or I like Ezra Bridger, or Grand Admiral Thrawn. We know those characters are coming to the new Ahsoka series. They've already been cast, or there's rumors for the casting, and a lot of the collectors who maybe collect action figures or really like the books from the 1990s and even the current run of Grand Admiral Thrawn books, they want to get the first appearance comics. It's just kind of driven. The comic book industry is kind of a weird thing, and prices are very strange, and they're very much tied to new content, and we've got so much of it now, whereas we used to not get so much. I mean, look at this year and into next year alone. We've got The Mandalorian Season 3. We've got the new Obi-Wan series that's coming out soon. We've got Ahsoka. We have the new Young Lando series. We've got Cassian Andor. And that's just off the top of my head. So, you know, it is pretty crazy how the comic book market works, but a lot of it's just, again, supply and demand. Luckily, a lot of these modern comics are a lot easier to find than some of the vintage ones, so you're not going to be paying crazy, like $5,000 for Star Wars #1 in a CGC 9.8, but there is demand for Kanan the Last Padawan #6, which is the first full appearance of the Rebels team. And, you know, the comic book market, we're going to talk more about prices here with some of these other questions, but that's a really good question. Kevin Brown, he says, hi, AFJ. I'm trying to recall if you've ever had anyone on from either CGC, AFA, or CAS for an interview. Have you tried that in the past, or no interest, or do the companies prefer not to? Thanks, and keep on grading. Well, thank you, Kevin, for the question. I have not had anybody on from the grading companies. CGC and AFA, I think, are just so big. They're such mega conglomerates that they don't want to deal with somebody small like me. I'm not that big of a channel, really. I've only got, you know, only 3,700 subscribers. It's already bigger than I ever expected, and I've got an awesome group of folks that support the channel from Patreon and just watching the channel and things like that. But still, 3,700 subscribers is pretty small, really, relative to some of the other larger channels out there. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it is just that they don't have any interest in doing these kind of interviews, at least with me. The CAS guys are different, though. I'm pretty close with those guys. I got to meet Chris and Todd over at the latest toy convention here in town, so I got to talk to them, talk shop, what CAS's plans are. They seem to have great plans. They are not without their issues, and I've certainly let them know what I think that they need to improve on just from a basic level for customer service. But, you know, CAS, their customer service is a lot better, in my opinion, than any of the other grading companies. And they listen to their customers. They work with me on labels. They let me know when items are getting close. They send photos to kind of update me and check the labels, things like that. If I see an issue, they always resolve it really quickly. So I really like working with CAS. I've not had them on my channel, but I have been on CAS's channel. And if I remember, I'll put a link to the bootleg, the history of bootleg Star Wars figures. I'll put a link to that video on their in the video description. I also did like a podcast for them, and, you know, a couple of live things for them. So they've been really great about having me on, and I've tried to return the favor by, you know, showing the items off that I get graded by them. And I think I've driven a lot of customers their way. I talked to a lot of subscribers who send stuff into CAS now. But should I have them on my channel? Yes, I probably should. And that's something I need to work on. And I really got, it was great to meet Chris and Todd. And I know, you know, Ken Black, who runs CAS, and Ross Barr, who's another owner. So I know a lot of those guys, Anthony. So hopefully one of these days soon, I'll get them on for a live stream and just ask them some of the tough questions that I have, and I've some of the concerns I have about where they're headed. But they have a really good plan in place, and they're going to be expanding their services, I think, over the next few years. And hopefully turnaround times, which is the big knock on all of the grading companies, will continue to improve. Next up, Jay Vizla says, hey, man, awesome news as always. And my question is, what are your thoughts on knockoff Star Wars figures and that market range? I've recently found out that some are worth more than the official Star Wars figs. Well, going back to the bootlegs, I encourage you to go check out CAS's video that I did for them. This is, I don't know, at least a year ago now, but I kind of give a brief history of Star Wars bootlegs. And there is a major difference between the concept of knockoff versus bootleg. Bootlegs at least in my mind, vintage bootlegs made in the 1980s and into the 1990s were largely in countries that had two issues. One of them being they were either too poor, where the vast majority of the population couldn't afford the licensed figures. So example is Mexico. They have licensed Lily Letty figures back in the 1980s. But the vast majority of the population couldn't afford those licensed figures. So there was a very big and thriving bootleg market where they would kind of do bootleg figures at different colors, all kinds of wacky colors, whether they're static or articulated. And so that's one. So that's one example, is that Mexico, while they had licensed figures, there were bootlegs that were made back then. But the other big differentiation for bootlegs is they were available, they were made in countries where the licensed figures, because of politics, were not available. And so a good example of that would be Poland. Because of the Cold War back in the 1980s, they didn't have access to any U.S. products like Kenner Star Wars figures. So within Poland, a lot of these factories produced really nice quality bootlegs. Knockoffs is a different story. When I think knockoff, I think like Chinese examples of the Black Series. You can get plenty of Boba Fett's and Darth Vader, original Orange Line Black Series knockoffs. They are made in China. They look just like the figure. And that's different. A lot of these bootlegs don't look anything like the figure, and they were made in countries where, because of politics or because of poverty, they weren't available. So hopefully that differentiation makes sense. In terms of price point, I mean, if you look at Uzes, for example, those mint on card can go for 5 figures. So there's definitely a demand, and it's a niche market, but it's a slowly growing niche market. The Polish bootleg figures from the 1980s and 1990s is another really good example of prices that have really gone stratospheric over the last 5 years. And I've got a number of them on my channel. You can go back and look them up. If you type in Action Figure Grader Polish bootleg, I've got many, many videos covering the Polish line. There's been 2 different volumes by Jacob Brzezinski, 2 different editions of his Polish bootleg history book, and kind of giving you photos of examples and things like that. So it is a thriving market. It's a thriving toy community that collects these vintage bootlegs. But I consider knockoff versus bootleg 2 totally different things, whereas knockoffs are really kind of designed to fool you into thinking that they're the licensed figure. So that's my definition anyway. I'm sure other people will disagree. Aaron Sherman says, my question, in your opinion, when getting autographs, is it good idea or bad idea to have vintage card back signed? Or would it be better to have them in acrylics and have the acrylic signed? So that's a good question, Aaron. Me personally, I don't think it's a good idea to get a vintage Kenner mint on card signed. In general, those tend to command lower prices than high-grade, unsigned card backs. If you want to get something signed, use something a little bit less expensive, like a vintage collection or Power of the Force 2. Power of the Force 2 in general are not very expensive. The negative is that the actual figure is very bulked up and muscular. He looks like Action Figure Grader after eating a bowl of bovine steroids. Those figures are super muscular. They're like He-Man. So a lot of people don't like those. But they're really cheap to get mint on card, even really clean. And those are often used for signings. You can use comic books, or the vintage collection is another good example. Any recent $15 vintage collection is another really good idea to use. But me personally, I would stay away from that. In terms of getting the acrylic signed, that's up to you. Me personally, I don't know if it really looks that great to have an acrylic signed, because the marker, the actual writing and the autograph doesn't show up that clearly on acrylic. It's just kind of streaky and just doesn't look that great. So if I'm going to spend the money at a convention, and a lot of those signatures from like Ashley Eckstein, for example, or Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, they can go for very, very big money, just the autograph signing fee. And to me, I would find something not non-Kenner licensed figure mint on card to use, because I just think that there's such a limited population of really clean examples that, and if you look at the sales prices for a lot of Kenner signed stuff like that, they don't do well. In general, they tend to command less money. TST Red T says, I'm headed to Star Wars Celebration this year. And again, this is another autograph question. Would you ever have the acrylic case of a loose graded item signed? He's got a 75 plus C-3PO and an 85 plus C-3PO with removable limbs, and he's thinking about having Anthony Daniels sign that. I have seen that. I have seen loose graded figures signed on the acrylic case. Again, me personally, I would not do that. I just think that in general, it doesn't look that good. It looks really streaky and transparent. and the autograph doesn't come through clearly, and people don't tend to like that very much. You know, again, I'm looking at it from a resale perspective. If it's for your personal collection, then do whatever you want to do. It's your stuff. But me personally, it's not something that I would do. I just think that there's cheaper, better alternatives like a TVC C3PO, or like the example would be the Target Droids exclusive 50th anniversary cartoon style C3PO. That's a really awesome card back, and it would look fantastic with Anthony Daniels' signature on it. I would choose something like that versus getting a loose graded vintage Star Wars figure and having the acrylic sign where it's just kind of hard to read, in my opinion, and doesn't come through that clearly. But that's just my personal opinion on it. Sandalorian Toy Hunter says, great channel. So if you bought a vintage Kenner figure carded, but the card is trashed, would I keep it carded or take it out and have it graded loose? I know this is taboo, but I'm still asking. Well, let me tell you, if you decide to do something like this, you're better off not telling anybody. Me personally, I don't recommend this. There's such a limited number of these out there, and I know that there's millions of them and millions of these things that were produced back in the 1980s, but in terms of really clean examples, they're hard to find, and there are a lot of people that have been caught taking figures off either because they wanted that version 5 Taiwan blaster to go with a Boba Fett for grading, or, you know, like the Ez Kiban, I think his name is, or Kez Iban, I can't remember how you pronounce it, but he comes with a blaster that goes with Luke Stormtrooper, and these guys are getting caught, and there's a lot of groups on Facebook that'll ban you immediately for life for doing that kind of stuff. So I think if you do it, you know, it's your stuff. I'm not going to tell you what to do with it. I don't recommend it. It's frowned upon within the collecting community on all the different Facebook groups. I certainly won't do it. But if that's something you want to do, then have at it. But you know, it's so easy for the most part to find these figures loose with a little bit of patience, especially if it's a carded figure on a trash. You know, if you got like a carded Weequay, just buy a loose figure. It's not that expensive to buy it. So that's my personal opinion on it. But I know that people do it. It still goes on. People still get caught doing it. But I personally would not recommend doing it just for the reasons I mentioned. 12-back Boba Fett says, is comic book pressing needed to get a high grade, or can a high grade still be achieved from a brand new comic? What is the cost? Well, first of all, the cost for grading the comic varies, but it can run anywhere from $5 to $15. It just depends on what era. If it's a modern comic, I probably wouldn't pay more than about $10 to get it pressed. Is it required? Probably not. It just depends on the quality of the book. A lot of the books that even are factory fresh, straight out of a sealed distributor box from Diamond Distributing, can have defects. The paper is so thin, the ink quality is so poor, they can have wave to the card and things like that. So in general, I do press my comics because I have a good presser. My first batch of like 35 or so, I did not get pressed. And I still got, I think, 28 out of the 35 came back in a CGC 9.8. But my recommendation is, especially if it's an expensive comic, to go ahead and get it pressed, spend the extra $5 or $10 and get it pressed. Before you send it in to get graded by CGC. The other thing is CGC will do what's called a pre-screen. So if you have a minimum order of at least 25 books, you can get them pre-screened at whatever grade you want to. What I do is I send in at least 25 books and I grade it. You know, they're all modern stuff. I say I want a minimum grade of CGC 9.8. Anything else, don't grade it. And then they charge you an $8 rejection fee if it's not a 9.8. And I've had pretty good success with that. You know, my last batch, I think I got in one box 24 out of 25, and then in another box I got 23 out of 25, something like that. So in general, it is possible, but I do press them now, and I just feel like it gives you a better chance to get a higher grade. If it's for your personal collection, you don't particularly care about the grade, it's up to you. But I think especially if it's an expensive comic, then spend the extra $5 to $15 and get it pressed first. Tim Barnes says, enjoy the videos. Do you think the comic market is weakening? What do you attribute that to? That's a good question. I do think that the comic book market in general is softening a little bit, and I think it needed to, quite honestly. It got way too high last year, kind of marched through about August of last year. That was kind of the peak for the comic book market, where stuff was just jumping like crazy, and there was a lot of disposable income with lockdowns and things like that. But prices have come back down. I'd say anywhere from 25 to 40%. I've gotten a number of really nice key issue Star Wars comics like Grand Admiral Thrawn, like Kanan #6 that I just mentioned, a few others in my collection that I picked up at great prices relative to the peaks. And some of them have bounced off those peaks and have started going back up. So I think part of it is it's just natural kind of ebbs and flows of the market. I think part of it too is just too much to collect. Every comic now has like 40 different cover variations. As you guys know, Mandalorian #1, which is going to be the first interior comic book appearance of The Mandalorian, that comes out next month on June 22nd. There's like 30 different covers, and I'm not going to collect them all. It's just too much. So I think that's part of it. I think, there's too much Disney Plus content. Every week it seems like we got a new show either being announced or airing on TV. We just had Moon Knight, we had Hawkeye, we've got all the Star Wars content. You can't keep up. They just had a new trailer for She-Hulk. And so I think because there's just so much now that gets constantly churned out by the media machine that is Hollywood, that you can't keep up with everything, and you got to pick and choose your battles. And so I've really kind of slowed down. I've pulled back a little bit in terms of which comics I really pick up. If it's something where I really love the cover, or if it's like a first appearance that I think might do well, then I'll get some. But I just think in general there's just too much to collect right now, and there's too many comics. It's just flooding the market. That again, it comes back down to supply and demand. And if you got a supply of 30 different covers for The Mandalorian #1, it's going to hurt the resale values because there's just so much to choose from. And there's going to be, if you look at the census for any book, there's going to be 1,000 different 9.8s for whatever cover for Mandalorian 9.8 or Mandalorian #1, and it's just going to cause there to be too much available. So all of those things I think are factoring into prices right now. Cobra Kai 84 says, would be great to get an update on your thoughts regarding the economy and the perceived impact on the collecting market in the short to mid term. And he says specifically from the perspective of as a collector looking to add higher priced items to their collection, should I wait? I got a lot of these types of questions. What's the economy going to do? As we talked about in a past video, a lot of the big investment banks are predicting a recession within either the US and or Europe sometime next year. And I argued in that video that is way too late. We're going to see a recession sooner than that. I think there's already signs that we're already in a recession. I'm going to go through some data here in a second. In my opinion, the recession is going to be globally kind of recognized sooner rather than later. The stock market is already in bear market territory, 20% down or more. And I think that the stock market is usually a predictor of what's coming, right? So they're supposed to be, the stock market is supposed to be a future prediction of where the economy is going or where future profits are going for specific companies. And me personally, if I'm looking to buy a high ticket item to answer his question directly, I would wait. I think we're going to see a pullback in Star Wars collectibles prices, both comics and action figures, sometime this fall. I could be wrong. There's a lot of live action content that can churn a lot of new collectors into the market, and that seems to be what has happened over the last year or two, combined with high inflation. Is inflation over? Who knows? But if you look at all the headlines right now, this is CNBC's front page headlines right now. This is today, May 18th is when I'm filming this. Dow tumbles 900 points as heavy selling returns to Wall Street following poor Target and Walmart results. And Walmart and Target both came out and said their results were terrible, and Target shares dropped by 25%. Walmart got hammered after they had an unexpected earnings miss, and they're all saying it's because of higher fuel costs, which we're going to talk about in a second, and supply chain issues. This war over in the Ukraine has caused a lot of supply chain disruption, both here in the U.S. as well as in Europe. Fuel costs are driving the transportation costs for a lot of goods and services higher. We also have China in lockdown right now, and they are a major supplier, or the major supplier, for the world's computer chips. So all of that stuff is kind of mishmashing together, causing these issues in the economy. Is the labor market healthy? Yes, but as I've argued in past videos, that is not the end-all be-all. And in my opinion, economists who are saying, this recession's not going to be till next year, they're crazy. They're crazy. I think we're either in a recession right now or one is coming very, very soon. So you need to plan your budget accordingly. Collectibles, in my opinion, should be the last thing you target. But if you got disposable income, me personally, I would wait. If you look at this article, this just came out Wednesday, May 18th, today. CEOs were surveyed, and they said their outlook dims sharply, with more than half expecting a recession ahead. Well, that's not really a shocker to me. They're saying it's going to be a very short to mild recession. I don't know how you can say that with everything that's going on. Inflation is so high right now, combined with high fuel costs, combined with supply chain issues. This is the perfect storm for a major recession. Is it going to be the 07, 08 recession, the Great Recession? No, I don't think it's going to be as bad as that. But all of this stuff is happening right now that has not been factored in to people's budgets. And people are starting to see the pain in their pocketbook, whether it's groceries or gas costs. And if you look at a lot of these other articles, here's another article that came out today. Households are now spending an estimated $5,000 a year just on gasoline. When you think about the median income in the U.S., and it's not that high, it's probably $60,000 to $80,000. When $5,000 of it is going towards gasoline, that is a major number. That is a major number, and I don't foresee any sort of short-term or intermediate-term change in that, just given everything that's going on in Europe. The gasoline costs are not going to go down anytime soon just because supply is lower. Russia is a major supplier of fuel. And with them basically on an island now and everyone trying to get off of Russian fuel in Europe, luckily the U.S. only maybe 3 to 5% of their oil consumption comes from Russia. But at the same time, the current administration is withholding new leases on oil and gas production sites. So all of this stuff is causing supply chain issues and shorter supply amounts. And so that's a big thing. Americans are now more stressed about money than ever, and it's hurting our mental health. I mean, all of these headlines just came out today, just today. So you have to factor in all this stuff when you start thinking about your disposable income, your fun money, so to speak, and plan accordingly. You know, I certainly have bought some expensive items here recently, but I also saved up and I also sold a lot of stuff in order to pay for it. And I'm being pretty careful with my money now. I've got a pretty good nest egg. I always recommend an emergency fund of at least 6 months worth. If you don't have a 6-month emergency fund and you're talking about buying Star Wars toys, you need to reevaluate, okay? You need to make sure that you have at least a 6-month nest egg. And luckily that there is a tight labor market right now, so people are, companies are demanding new employment. But, I would just be very careful. I would be very cautious because there are a lot of companies that are pulling back on new hires right now. And I think that's going to grow. I think you're going to see a lot more of that as consumer demand drops for goods and services because a lot of their money is going towards groceries, going towards living expenses and rent that's on the way up right now, and fuel costs. So a lot of that stuff you just got to factor in. Rob Rosati, thank you so much. I really enjoy all your content. I learned so much. Question, due to the coming non-plastic packaged figures, do you think it's worth it going after the VC I'm missing now, or due to the apparent recession, should I wait? And so this is another recession question. I got a ton of these. Me personally, I think you should wait for any TVC high budget items. I think you're going to see a flood of TVC 1.0 hit the market once collectors finally realize that this is not an if it's going to happen, but when Hasbro moves over to plastic-free packaging. It is going to happen, in my opinion. We just looked at, in a recent video, actually the last subscriber Q&A video, the mock-up, the example kind of prototype for the AT-ST driver with a ridiculous-looking paper packaging, and that's apparently going to be what it looks like, or very similar to that. So I think what's going to happen is a lot of long-time vintage collection collectors are going to dump a lot of stuff. So there's going to be about maybe let's call it a 6 to 9 month window where we're going to see a massive supply dump on eBay or on Facebook or wherever you buy your figures, and I think you'll get some better deals. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. Absolutely. If it's something you really want, then go after it, But from my perspective, I think if I'm going to buy any more TVC 1.0 figures that are high dollar, like a Shea Vizsla or a General Grievous, some of the ones that I want to add to my collection, I'm probably going to wait, to be honest with you, because I think that the storm is coming for the vintage collecting community, and there's going to be a lot of collectors that are fed up with Hasbro's kind of decision making. And a lot of people are going to exit the line and they're going to dump their current collections on eBay, and we're going to see some really nice fire sale prices. I could be wrong though. So don't, I'm not the Nostradamus of little plastic dolls. So keep all that in mind. Otto Sutherland says, what's the most expensive figure you have ever purchased? That is a good question, Otto. If you guys remember from, I think it was last fall, I picked up a photo book sample from Javier Rui Lopez's Spanish PvP POC guide. It is the Toxic Limbs Bossk. That is the most expensive figure I've ever purchased. It's an AFA 60, but there's probably less than 20 of them out there that have been AFA graded. And the timing was right. I had some money set aside. I also got it for a very fair price because my buddy Matt sold it to me for probably quite a bit less than what he could have sold it for publicly. So all that kind of stuff, it was a perfect storm for me in order to acquire the figure that I really wanted to get. And I'm very happy to have it in my collection. Would I be buying that today? The answer is no. I would not be buying that today in the current environment. There's just too much risk with my job. I'm in real estate. I think real estate prices are at a peak and the economy is kind of softening, and there's potential that we're going to see a major drop in real estate prices. When there's a major drop in demand for houses, there's a major drop in action figure graders' normal income. The last Great Recession, I made 25% of what I normally make for about 2 years. There was a lot of video gaming going on. There was a lot of no collecting going on. So I wouldn't buy that figure today, but at the time it made sense because I had a pretty good amount of disposable, discretionary income set aside that I used to buy one really awesome figure. But that's a great question. Carl Reddish says, this is the best question of the group, by the way. Tacos, hard or soft? That is a great question, Carl, and my answer is yes. Anytime we have taco night, we usually do Taco Tuesdays here at Action Figure Graders Household. Taco Tuesday is a real thing here at my house, and I eat both. I eat hard tacos and soft tacos, lots of guacamole, lots of beans. Luckily, I sleep in a separate bedroom, so as those beans make their way through AFG's internal geography, my wife is not subjected to the torment that I unleash on the environment. That went too gross for it. That went way too gross. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I hope all is well. Thank you so much for the great questions. As always, please include another question below. Please like this video as it helps out the channel. Thanks again, and I'll be back soon.